The first cracks in my marriage appeared not with slammed doors or tearful accusations, but in the quiet erosion of shared routines. For 17 years, Claire and I had built a life anchored in predictable rhythms. Saturday morning farmers' markets, Sunday crossword puzzles by the fireplace, annual trips to the same Vermont cabin where we had Dee first said, "I love you," under a canopy of autumn leaves. Stability was our religion, and I worshipped at its altar until the day I found the receipt. It was tucked inside her gym bag, crumpled and faintly scented with a cologne I didn't recognize. A $287 charge from the Hawthorne, a boutique hotel downtown, dated 2 days prior, a Thursday when Claire had claimed she was working late. My fingers trembled as I traced the embossed logo, the numbers blurring into a Rorschach test of betrayal. I told myself it could be a mistake, a client dinner, anything but the obvious. But then I noticed the second receipt beneath it, a jewelry store charge for a silver bracelet engraved with "Always J." My stomach turned. J. Jonathan, her assistant, the 28-year-old with the artfully tousled hair and a habit of lingering too long in her office. I didn't confront her. Confrontation bred chaos, and chaos was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I began to observe late-night work calls where she'd murmur behind closed doors, sudden gym sessions that lasted 3 hours, a new playlist filled with songs I'd never heard her mention. She'd even stopped wearing her wedding ring, citing a rash that magically appeared the week Jonathan gifted her that bracelet. The evidence coiled around my throat like a noose, tightening with every lie she polished to a shine, but it was the financial trail that fascinated me. Claire had always handled our accounts, her MBA mind deftly navigating investments and tax filings. Now I combed through statements with forensic precision, small withdrawals labeled client lunches at restaurants she'd never mentioned, a $5,000 transfer to a Cayman Islands account I hadn't authorized, and then the pièce de résistance, a shell company named C&J Holdings, registered under her maiden name and Jonathan's. Their shared initials mocked me from the screen. They weren't just stealing my marriage, they were stealing my future. I waited until the night of her charity gala, an annual event where she dazzled donors in her emerald green gown. As she adjusted her earrings in the mirror, I casually mentioned a last-minute board meeting. Her relief was palpable. "Don't wait up," she said, pressing a perfunctory kiss to my cheek. The moment her taillights vanished, I logged into her cloud account. She made one fatal mistake, using our home Wi-Fi to back up photos of her and Jonathan wrapped around each other in hotel sheets, his hand flaunting the wedding band she'd convinced him to remove. For 3 sleepless nights, I mapped out their patterns. Jonathan's Instagram boasted a fondness for vintage watches and crypto scams. Claire's calendar marked bi-weekly client consultations at the Hawthorne. They were creatures of habit, addicted to the thrill of secrecy, a weakness I intended to exploit. I started small, cancelling their hotel reservations under fake names, triggering fraud alerts on their shared credit cards. When Claire blamed system glitches, I nodded sympathetically, pouring her another glass of Malbec. Then I escalated. Using a burner phone, I catfished Jonathan as a wealthy investor interested in his amateurish crypto schemes. He took the bait greedily, divulging details about his and Claire's offshore accounts. I documented every confession, every boast about their untraceable empire. They'd built a house of cards, and I was ready to blow. The final piece came from an unlikely source, Jonathan's estranged father, a retired IRS agent with a grudge. Over whiskey at a dimly lit bar, I fed him enough breadcrumbs to ignite his curiosity. Within days, he'd uncovered layers of tax evasion even Claire hadn't masked. I didn't need to destroy them. They'd done it to themselves. I just needed to light the fuse. On the morning of their next hotel rendezvous, I shipped a thumb drive to the SEC, anonymous of course. Then I settled into my favorite armchair, opened the live stream of Claire's gala, and watched her laugh with donors, oblivious to the storm she'd courted. The irony was exquisite. She'd spent years perfecting her facade, never suspecting that the quiet man she'd dismissed as predictable had been studying her every move. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a knife in the dark. It was a mirror, held up until the reflection cracked. The collapse began with a whisper, a Wall Street Journal headline about an undisclosed investigation into local finance firms. Claire dismissed it over breakfast, scrolling past the article with a flick of her thumb. "Just more regulatory noise," she said, reaching for her third espresso. But by noon, her office line was ringing non-stop. Panicked investors, furious board members. Jonathan's name spat like a curse. I observed from the sidelines a ghost in my own home. She stopped wearing the bracelet, stopped smiling, stopped pretending. The shell company unraveled first, its Cayman funds frozen after an anonymous tip. Jonathan's crypto ventures collapsed next. His Instagram flooded with threats from burned investors. Claire scrambled to sever ties, deleting emails, shredding documents. But the trail was indelible. She'd signed every wire transfer, every offshore filing. Her downfall was a symphony of her own design, each movement more damning than the last. The IRS audit arrived like a funeral notice. Jonathan, in a desperate bid for leniency, turned state's witness, offering Claire's neck to the guillotine. I'll never forget the night she stormed into my study, eyes wild, a subpoena crumpled in her fist. "You!" she hissed. "You did this!" I feigned ignorance, my face a mask of concern. "Did what?" She stared at me, searching for cracks in the facade, but I'd had years to practice. By dawn, she'd packed a suitcase, her voice trembling with threats of legal retaliation. I didn't stop her. Let her run. Let her bury herself deeper. The real masterpiece came weeks later. Using a proxy, I leaked Claire's hotel photos to a gossip blog, not as a jilted spouse, but as a concerned citizen appalled by corporate malfeasance. The story went viral, her infidelity eclipsing even the financial crimes. Donors withdrew, friends dissolved. The woman who'd once commanded boardrooms now flinched at camera flashes, her emerald gown swapped for courtroom greys. Jonathan fared worse. His father's testimony painted him as the puppet master, a con artist preying on Claire's ambition. The judge gave him 5 years, his vintage watches auctioned to repay victims. Claire plea bargained to avoid prison, a lifetime of fines and probation, her reputation ash. Yet the cruelest blow was one I hadn't planned. On the eve of her sentencing, Claire showed up at our doorstep, her face gaunt, pride finally broken. "I'm sorry," she choked out, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. "I never meant—" I closed the door before she could finish. Let her apologies rot on the porch. Months later, I sold the house, a sleek, modernist tomb filled with ghosts. The realtor marveled at its charm, oblivious to the cracks in the foundation. I moved to a coastal town where no one knew my name, spending mornings on a weathered dock, watching fishing boats carve through mist. Claire's letters arrived weekly, unopened. Her voice lived in my periphery. A tabloid snippet at the grocery store, a murmured rumor at the post office. Bankruptcy, eviction, a half-hearted suicide attempt for sympathy. I felt nothing. The man who'd loved her had drowned in the wake of her choices. Then, on a rain-slicked afternoon, a padded envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside, a key, a deed, and a note from Jonathan's father. The cabin in Vermont, he'd written. "Seized assets, yours if you want it. I drove there at dawn." I drove. The autumn leaves blazed as they had decades ago, the air sharp with pine and memory. In the bedroom, I found Claire's old journal tucked under a floorboard, pages filled with plans for a future she de-incinerated. A paragraph stopped me cold. "He thinks I don't see him, but I do, the way he watches, silent. One day he'll realize I'm not the villain. He's the one who made me this way." I burned the journal in the stone fireplace, its embers curling like dying stars. As smoke spiraled into the chimney, I realized the truth. Revenge had never been about her. It was the scalpel I'd used to cut her out of me, cell by cell, until only scars remained. The cabin stands empty now. I visit occasionally, tracing the ghosts of who we were. The silence here is different. Not absence, but equilibrium. Claire's face fades a little more each year, her voice dissolving into the rustle of leaves. Some say forgiveness is the final act of healing. They're wrong. Closure is a myth sold to the naive. The wound remains, but you learn to walk with the limp. I fish, I read, I breathe. And when the nightmares come, her pleading eyes, Jonathan's sneer, I step onto the porch and gaze at the stars, cold and indifferent. They remind me of what I've known since that first receipt. The universe doesn't care about justice, but I do.